Question number 11, Rino Tirikatene.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Customs. Does she agree with the Prime Minister's statement that, quote, "We will confront the pea problem using the full force of the government's arsenal," end quote? And if so, why does an experienced customs officer say that only 1 in 10 illicit drug imports is being seized at the border?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Yes, I absolutely support the Prime Minister, and we have the objective data to prove it. Fact 1, increased tools and intelligence by customs has allowed them to seize a record number of drugs at the border for the last 3 years, and 2015 was the highest. Fact 2, the number of meth users has decreased significantly from 2.2% to less than 1%, and the best news is that they're getting older rather than younger. And fact 3, the price of meth has remained high and stable. In fact, with Australia, it's one of the highest in the world, and increased supply would have seen it plummet.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, that was a question on notice.
I agree.
It had 2 parts.
Could the Minister address the second part of the question?
So, yes, Mr. Speaker. So there's simply no evidence to support that anonymous claim. As I've said, our data in terms of numbers of interceptions, in terms of the numbers of users and the price of meth refutes his rather fanciful ideas.
Supplementary question. Rino Tirikatene.
To the Minister, what proportion of drugs are customs intercepting at the border?
The Honourable
Mr.
Nicky
Speaker.
Wagner.
We are accepting a larger and increased amount at the border. As I've said, we've got increased intelligence and increased tools to do that. Over the last year, in terms of labs, 2,000 samples...
Would the Minister please resume his seat when I get to my feet? There's a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I asked a very specific question to the Minister, and she hasn't addressed my specific question regarding what proportion of drugs are customs intercepting at the border. It's a straight question.
I invite the member to think carefully about his question. How would any Minister of Customs possibly answer that question accurately? I'll allow the Minister to address the question as she was. Order. I have spoken. Order. Member will resume his seat. Allow the Minister to complete her answer.
Mr. Speaker, that question is impossible to answer, but all evidence that we have points to an increased numbers of interceptions and less use in society and a stable price.
Point of order.
If we were not...
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I hope this is a fresh point of order, not in any way questioning a ruling I've already given. I'll hear from Mr. Tirikatene.
The Minister alluded in her answer to the primary question, sir, that the numbers in the primary were wrong. So
order.
Now she's saying that
the member will resume his seat. He's starting now to try my patience. The answer was given very clearly by the Minister. If the member hadn't been jumping to his feet to raise a point of order, he may have heard it more clearly. Does the member have a further supplementary?
Supplementary, Mr.
Supplementary question, Rino Tirikatene.
How can the Minister be satisfied that the Customs Service is minimising the smuggling of drugs and precursors into New Zealand when there are only 800 frontline officers engaged in border protection, despite having a budget for 1,000 officers?
The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Mr. Speaker, I have absolute confidence in what Customs is doing at our border. What we are finding is that we're putting increased resources into new tools and to new intelligence, and actually the use of SmartGate, which allows the auto-processing of routine customers, allows our officers to deal with at-risk passengers. So we have increased vigilance at the border, and let me reassure you that nothing is left to go past, and anything we've found is recorded for future intelligence.
Supplementary.
Order.
Supplementary to the Minister.
Supplementary question, Rino Tirikatene.
To the Minister, can she rule out any link between the performance of the Customs Service in intercepting drug precursors at the border and there being no decrease since 2008 in the availability of P?
The Honourable Nicky Wagner.
Mr Speaker, yes, there is a link. It means that the Customs Department is doing a good job. As I've already said, interception numbers have increased. 2015 was a record year. The number of P users has dropped and the price has remained stable and high. Those are the best indicators that Customs is doing a good job.
Question number 12.